Good morning, and thank you all for joining our Chamber Chat. I'm Gigi Godwin, President and CEO of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, and it is a pleasure to welcome all of you here today to join us for today's presentation and discussion on workplace strategies to implement now for your future success, presented by Cresa. And what an important topic this is, especially as business leaders like you need to innovate, adapt, and make important decisions now to position yourselves strategically for what we hope will soon be a post-pandemic recovery. Today's program and others that are coming up soon are intended to support your success. We do this by being your trusted source, by providing you the right information at the right time from the right experts. And during these important presentations and discussions, we also hear from you and we hear your concerns. And we want to translate, and we do translate, what you care about into proactive advocacy on your behalf at the federal, state, and local level. Now, today, before we begin, please note that we will email this presentation to you following today's webinar. During the presentation, please feel free to ask questions by using the chat box. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. MCCC Board, I'm going to introduce them, but then I'm going to ask some questions. So, introducing MCCC Board Member Kenneth King. Wave, Kenny, so
Hello.
that they see you. There you are. Joined by Erica King, waving.
Hello.
Christie Minch, waving.
Hi.
There we go. And Michael Hetchkop.
Good morning.
There you are, all of Cresa, for a presentation and a conversation on what every business owner or manager needs to know to best position your companies for what's next, to prepare your workplace for your employees and your customers during the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. Before we begin, and before I turn it over to our presenters, we do have a few questions for you, our participants today. Are you ready? The first question is, what industry is your company in? Are you a government contractor? Are you in biotechnology, nonprofit association, professional services, technology, or in some other category? Please vote on your screen. All right, I'm going to the next question. Next, what percentage of your workforce has returned to the actual workplace or office? And is that question going to pop up on the screen? Yes, there it is. Select one. 0 to 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75%, 75 to 100%. We've been in the office all along. Yeah. Take a minute, please, to give us your feedback. All right, and our final question. Does your organization plan to maintain a flexible work from home policy post-pandemic? This is a quick yes or no question. All right, and so while our team is tabulating your responses, We are going to get right into our introduction, and I am now turning it over to Erica King, who will begin today's presentation. Erica?
Gigi, we greatly appreciate that introduction, and hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today. You know, this pandemic has certainly been devastating for the economy and really our population as a whole. And as businesses across the world are adjusting to the changes in the way we're doing business, reducing real estate expenditures are currently on the forefront, with many business leaders wondering, when will we go back to the office? What will that look like? And how can we best position ourselves for the future? However, businesses are focused on much more than just reducing costs. Companies want to enhance their workplace so that it's a space that their employees are eager to come back to, while being a place where they can synergize and more effectively achieve the business objectives. But before all that, businesses want to instill confidence in their workforce, that when they do return to the office, they know leadership really has taken the proper precautions to ensuring their safety. So that brings us to who we are and why we're here. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Cresa, we are the largest firm in the world to exclusively represent the end users of space, which gives us a front row seat and tremendous resources and insight to evaluating how COVID-19 is changing the real estate landscape and how companies can be prepared. So before getting started, we'd like to formally introduce the panelists.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth King. I'm a principal at Cresa and have been representing tenants for over 40 years. In addition, I sit on the board of directors for the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce as their commercial real estate expert, helping to advise the chamber along with many members on their real estate related matters.
And my name is Erica King. I'm a senior vice president with Cresa, and for the last 14 years, I've been exclusively representing the occupiers of space, helping them to develop and implement the most advantageous real estate strategies. Having grown up in Montgomery County, I'm excited to be here today to share what we've learned since the onset of COVID-19 about the evolving workplace and changing commercial real estate market.
Good morning, I'm Christie Minch. I'm managing principal of our workplace strategy group. My background is actually in architecture and interior design, but about 14 years ago, I shifted into the commercial real estate business and have been advising clients on their workplace strategy ever since. So as you can imagine, my role quickly sort of went to pandemic and post-pandemic experts, so we have a lot to talk to you about today.
Hi there, I'm Mike Hetchkop. I'm the principal, and I head up our lease forensics and enforcement division. And I'm a CPA, I'm an MBA. I'm also adjunct faculty at Georgetown University in their Masters of Real Estate program. My primary function is to make sure that the lease that you sign has been administered properly. And we'll talk more about that later, about the added costs that you might see due to COVID and how to protect yourself and make sure that you're paying what you should be paying.
So to kick off the conversation, we'll start with the impacts of COVID-19 and what can be some corresponding strategies.
Hello. How has COVID-19 affected our economy? Well, since the beginning of the year, there are several events which have impacted us. These events include the stock market crashed, travel and hospitality industries have come to a halt, social gatherings, sporting events, and conferences were prohibited. Retail businesses were forced to close, although they are now slowly reopening. Schools went virtual, and unemployment rate skyrocketed, and work from home mandates were implemented, which has resulted in the largest work from home experiment ever. So what have we learned as companies across the globe were forced to work from home? Through Cresa's international tenant surveys, as well as the surveys conducted by Monster.com and Global Workplace Analytics, we have found that 57% of people are keeping their typical work schedules. Of the 43% of people whose schedules have changed, 21% are getting an even earlier start, with the remaining 22% working less by virtue of starting later, getting distracted by unrelated work issues, and in some cases becoming caregivers for children and other family members. 65% of people surveyed found that their overall productivity has been affected, with 24% of these people actually reporting that they've been more productive while working from home. What people miss the most about not being in the workplace is collaboration, the energy within the office, and the social aspects of going to work. We have found particularly interesting is that 69% of the people polled reported experiencing burnout symptoms while working from home, which is 20% higher than the Munster.com survey conducted in May of this year. 19% of the people in America want to say goodbye to the office forever, with the vast majority of people preferring a hybrid scenario. And globally, 16% of the people want to say goodbye to the office forever. We see many companies whose people are working from home have adapted new communication tools to include Zoom, Skype, and Workplace, just to name a few.
So how will these changes impact the economy? Well, to answer that question, we evaluated the impacts of historical economic shock events, such as the dot-com bubble in 2000, which overlapped with 9/11 in 2001. We then evaluated the global financial crisis in 2008. And lastly, we analyzed sequestration in 2013. More specifically, we looked at the Stephen Fuller Institute's Economic Coincidence Index, which measures the region's economic strength and output. Now, when comparing the index growth profiles following these economic events, we found that output deflates rather immediately, and economic contraction is really bottoming out about 6 to 9 months after these particular events. We also found that growth rates don't generally rebound until somewhere between 15 and 18 months after the event. And during those times, real estate activities naturally slow as businesses tend to limit expenses and delay major real estate decisions. So consequently, the demand for office space generally falls. Now, the difference with this pandemic and these other economic shock events is that this event is still occurring and the exact end date is unknown. In addition, this is the only event that's resulted in work from home mandates. So where does that really leave the real estate market as a result?
Before we can project where the Montgomery County real estate market is heading, it's important to understand the current market conditions. At the end of the second quarter of 2020, there was about 57.3 million square feet of Class A and B space in Montgomery County. Over the last 2 years, vacancy in the county has been on a steady rise. Much of the increase in vacant space can be attributed to the Bethesda submarket, where new construction has added to the overall vacancy and has created a flight to quality, with tenants laying out more efficiently in newer buildings. In addition, more recently, the former Discovery building in Silver Spring has become available. With about 20% of the building having been leased by Children's Hospital, the remaining balance of 380,000 square feet is still vacant, bringing vacancy in the county up to approximately 15.5%, which is the highest vacancy level Montgomery County has experienced since 2016. Through the balance of 2020, we expect to see a reduction in leasing activity, mainly resulting from the pandemic, which, coupled with the delivery of 7272 Wisconsin Avenue in the fourth quarter of 2020, as well as new developments at Pike and Rose and the Quince Orchard Boulevard becoming available later this year, vacancy is expected to increase to 16.7%, with the amount of leasable space increasing to just over 58 million square feet. Even with the higher vacancy in Montgomery County, rental rates have been steadily increasing in some submarkets, but have been decreasing in others. When looking at the market overall, which is predominantly made up of second-generation buildings, rental rates are approximately $30.85 on a full-service basis, which by the end of the year will decrease slightly to about $30.04 due to the reduced demand in the market. Excuse me. And looking forward, particularly as many businesses are reevaluating their space needs, one would generally expect vacancy rates to continue to increase following COVID-19. But because of the marketplace, because of the makeup of the Montgomery County tenant base, which has a high concentration of biotechnology, pharmaceutical science, health research laboratories, as well as many federal contracting firms, the county's real estate is somewhat insulated during this pandemic-induced economic downturn. Further, new buildings in Montgomery County, which have contributed to much of the current vacancy, historically lease up much quicker than second-generation space, with much of the space being pre-leased and occupied as soon as the buildings deliver. Going forward, the new buildings delivering in Montgomery County over the next 2 years, including the 2 on Medical Center Drive, Marriott's headquarters, and Montgomery County Police Department headquarters, are all pre-leased and therefore will not add any additional vacancy to the market. With no new additional buildings being built, and with the region's strong tenant base, we actually believe vacancy will slightly decrease to 14.3% in 2022, with rental rates staying relatively flat and increasing by about 65 cents over the next 2 years. With that said, the vast majority of business in Montgomery County are in second-generation space, for which we see a different trajectory. If we were to only evaluate the segment of the market, excluding new trophy space and lab space, we are projecting that vacancy rates could increase as much as 2 basis points, and net effective rental rates, once factoring concessions, could decrease by as much as 10% at the softest point of the market.
Now, based on our analysis of the market, which was oversupplied, as Kenny indicated, pre-pandemic, and coupled with the expectation for many companies to maintain some level of working from home, which was supplemented by the poll, and it seems will continue going forward post-pandemic, we found that occupier leverage is increasing, particularly for second-generation space in Montgomery County. If you're a company that wants to try to take advantage of the market conditions, we would suggest engaging in your negotiation when there's the greatest window of opportunity. With the current uncertainty in the market from both the pandemic and the upcoming election, we believe this window of opportunity, if you will, has already started. We've seen tenant demand significantly decrease from where it was 6 months ago. And as a result, we're negotiating unprecedented terms and conditions and are renegotiating leases much earlier than we've seen during any of the previous economic shock events. However, as this pandemic continues and potentially could get worse in the winter, we think that the market will progressively become even more tenant favorable. And for this particular economic shock event, we think the bottoming out will be 6 to 9 months following a widely available vaccine, which that exact date is to be determined. So based on our view that the market will not completely rebound until as much as 18 months following a vaccine, this window of opportunity will likely continue through mid and maybe as late 2022. So during this economic downturn, the lack of demand will put pressure on landlords to negotiate even more tenant favorable terms centered around reducing costs, increasing flexibility, and mitigating risk through several different lease provisions. But in interest of time, I'll leave that for you to review at your leisure when you receive electronic copies of the presentation. So it's now been 7 months since we first started experiencing the impacts of COVID-19. And assuming that you've already taken steps to stabilize your operations, there really are 3 major areas where we're suggesting companies currently focus their efforts from a real estate perspective. The first is determining what your space needs and space goals will be post-pandemic, including to what extent working from home will be incorporated into your permanent work model. You then want to develop your strategy for achieving those objectives, which may include scenario planning for the different outcomes that you're evaluating. And this typically leads companies to 4 primary options. You may decide to remain status quo. We have a handful of clients who are unable to work from home, primarily in the government contracting and life science sectors. So their physical space needs really haven't changed much. In addition, they may not have any critical date on the horizon, whether it be a right or an option or an expiration date that they can leverage to take advantage of the current economic conditions. For these businesses, it may be best not to make any changes to their real estate, except for maybe more minor improvements within their space to make it more pandemic friendly. You could also look to sublease underutilized space. Now, this would be for groups in a similar scenario to the above, in that they don't have a critical date over the next several years, but they realize that once implementing more liberal work from home policies, they will ultimately have space that they no longer need. For these companies, we would suggest putting your excess space on the market, or depending on what your future space requirements will be, you could sublease your entire premises and relocate to the right size offices. Now, if you're a company that's unsure of your future post-pandemic, but really need relief today just to weather the storm, you may be looking at some sort of rent deferment, which is typically achieved by amortizing the abated rent over your remaining lease term, or through a lease extension based on the number of months that your rent was abated. And lastly, if you're a company that's confident in its success post-pandemic and you want to be able to capitalize on the current downturn, you may elect to what we call blend and extend, which means you renegotiate your lease under more advantageous terms and likely less space if you plan to maintain a more flexible work from home environment. In exchange, you would provide the landlord with additional lease term. Now, we know that for many people, it may seem a little premature to think about your real estate strategy, considering the amount of uncertainty you may be facing, and given that you may be minimally using your offices at this time. But by taking the time to engage in comprehensive scenario planning, it will really give your firm the advantage of being able to implement your strategy during the best possible window of opportunity. So while working through your real estate strategy, you should also be evaluating both historical and future operating expenses and real estate taxes, which Mike will address momentarily. And assuming you will return to the office in some capacity, it's imperative that you develop your return to office strategy, which Christie will be reviewing in greater detail. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Oh, great. Thanks, Erica. Okay, so many of you, if you have returned to your office or walked by or seen the building, you're probably going to notice a number of changes. You know, when you walk into the building, you'll see arrows, which way to go in, which way to go out. You'll see more sanitation stations. You could actually go through, Erica, if you don't mind clicking through. I could talk a little bit about some of the items that we'll be talking about here. What I want you to be prepared for is, of these items that the landlord is going to be implementing because of COVID, which of these items really should be on your side of the ledger and which should be on their side. So there's going to be a lot of discussion on that. But prior to that, a number of things that you are going to see is you're likely to see, HVAC upgrades in the building. You may see filter changes. I did mention cleaning protocols. You may see a cleaning crew around more during the day than you might have in the past. Sanitization stations, you'll see the Purell dispensers pretty much everywhere. Some buildings are putting in temperature scanning stations, so when the occupants walk in, they could determine who has a fever, and if you get past the station, they'll arrest you. No, I don't know, I'm just kidding. But but they're going to want to know who's coming into the building that is a potential concern. There's hands-free equipment that's going to be, in the restrooms. You'll see that's going to be modified. We also know that there's been a tremendous reduction in the use of public transportation. So there are buildings that are also trying to implement storage lockers. And those storage lockers will be for those who've taken public transportation to potentially put their jackets in, so when they walk into the building, it's potentially a little bit safer. Also, you may see additional personnel, building ambassadors who may show you that how many people can go into the elevator at the same time. So, these costs are likely to be a mixture of being borne by the landlord or being borne by the tenant. That's why when Erica was mentioning before, the only way to understand this is really to have a dialogue with your landlord, but also to make sure that you have, in your files, previous year operating expense data so that you have something to compare to. We'll show you a trend right after this. But the measures that we're talking about, and I talked about a number so far, in some cases I've seen where, landlords have talked about building upgrades to be as much as $3 a square foot. If you're in a 100,000 square foot building, it's obviously a lot of money. If it's something that is really to be borne by the tenant, those costs should be amortized. If it's something that we believe the capital expense of the landlord, it should fall on their side. That expense should be borne by them. So there's going to be a lot going on, I could tell you, with that. I've also seen where landlords have added medical staff, within their organizations to help put together a policy for post-COVID. So, we'll have to see what's going on there as well. Also, I talked a little bit earlier about the upgrades. You might see some increased utility costs because they're going to try to put more fresh air in the building. So like I said, there's a lot going on. Also, and I could probably spend the hour and a half on this, and I won't. I'll spare everybody, including my team. Gross ups are actually probably in every one of your leases if you have a full service or triple net lease in many cases, which allows the landlord to increase expenses as if the building is 95% or 100% occupied. I'll actually stop there. It's extremely more technical than that, but it is going to come into play in the fact that you haven't been in your space for at least 6 months of the year. So, when we get to, if you really want to drill down to that, our contact information is behind, is at the end of this presentation, and I'll be more than happy to spend as much time as you want on that topic. If we go to the next slide, Erica, here is a sample operating expense analysis. Again, you'll get a copy of this, but we're looking at categories that will change the most, of being probably cleaning, utilities, repairs and maintenance. So as I mentioned earlier, if you decide and say, hey, Mike, I just got this bill, I don't quite understand it, I don't know what I'm paying for, I'm going to ask you for prior years information so I can see on a pre-pandemic basis what this building was occupying at, on a per square foot basis. So I'll be able to, and my team will be able to tell you that these costs are within the right range, not within the right range, or let's get back to the landlord and find out what's going on. So again, as I mentioned, get with your landlords, look at their back to work plans, and try to understand what changes they're going to make in the building. Feel free to give me a call if you have any questions. And that's it for me for now.
And Christie, we'll turn it over to you to address the return to the workplace.
Great, thank you. All right, so this is a hot topic for many right now. I know a lot of organizations have largely put together their return to the workplace plan, but many have sort of pushed it off, right? So at first we were seeing a lot of, June of 2020 we'll go back, and then it got pushed to Labor Day, 2020, and now we're seeing a lot of we're going to wait until January, or beyond 2021, even summer of 2021, just to get through the winter and see what's going on. So it's giving people a little bit more time to gather more data and think more thoroughly through their return to workplace. So we've got a little checklist here. Erica, if you want to start clicking through some of these. I think it goes without saying, but just, making sure that we're staying on top of what's going on in your local jurisdiction, how CDC might be changing their guidance. So I think it's super important to just sort of stay on top of it. We often have someone's HR team, it's okay, you can keep going, managing that. to make sure that, these things seem to change quite frequently. So making sure that we're communicating and understanding what's going on. And then chatting with your employees, understanding what's going on. This is a very personal situation for many people. Are you immunocompromised? Do you have children at home that are, in virtual school at this point, or other, no daycare or other things that you sort of have to figure out on the fly and try and keep your job? Do you feel at risk? Are you taking care of elderly people? How's your productivity? How are you doing at home? Is there anything we can do to better your work from home office environment? And then how do you feel about coming back to the office? Honestly, coming back to the office starts when you leave the front door. So how are you getting to the office? And then when you get to the office, making sure they understand how to work their way to your physical office space through the building and their protocols, and then into your office space. So just really kind of keeping a tab on what's going on with your employees. And then your criteria for occupancy. So, who should return, and how are you going to determine the appropriate level? So the percentage of occupancy we're seeing obviously driven by sort of your local jurisdiction. So whether you're in Maryland or DC or Virginia or wherever your office or offices might be, taking a look at what the local jurisdiction is recommending for max occupancy. So when you understand that, then you can start to layer in who should come back when and how. Is it essential employees, in the government contracting or other sort of environment, or is it more liberal and you're sort of leaving it up to your employees on how they want to come back? Communication with the landlord, extremely important. What measures is your building taking to prepare for reentry? As Michael mentioned earlier, seeing a lot of increased sanitation, HVAC measures, how many people can stand in an elevator or take the stairs, directional signage, all kinds of things. So it varies by building, but it's very important to understand what they're doing to layer into your planning for going back into your office space. And then preparing your space. So once you understand all that, assuming, you have some people that are going to the office just to get mail and keep track of, supplies and all of that jazz, just making sure that you have it set up with proper sanitizing areas throughout your office space, potentially signage. There are a number of things that some of our clients are doing, including putting like portable HEPA air filters in more kind of open office environments or larger conference rooms. So there's a number of potential retrofits that can happen. Just again, you want to layer in what the landlord is doing as well, so you're not potentially spending money you don't need to. And then who do you really need to have at your space at this time? We're working with a lot of our clients and understanding, where should their mail come? How should they be accepting deliveries? Are they having visitors? And if they are, what protocols are they going to have for their visitors that come in to ensure that you're keeping your employees safe and everyone feels safe? And then a leadership team. So we have a lot of sort of return to the workplace or return to office task force that are being developed. Sort of who is on that? How are we communicating? Who's going to track if somebody gets ill? Again, logging deliveries or visitors, ordering supplies. So you might have all these sanitizing stations up, but what happens when they run out? So there was a lot of supply and demand issues at the start of this. We've been seeing that get better, which is good. But it's sort of maintaining an adequate attic stock of some of these things so you're not running out. And then developing your guidelines in a more formal sort of communication plan to your employees. So, I mean, in a nutshell, right, we're reducing density, we're increasing sanitizing areas, and at the same time, providing PPE or protective gear for employees or masks, things like that. But you want to sort of develop this in a more formal communication to employees so they feel comfortable and safe, and like they know what they're doing and they have a roadmap when they return. Again, the communication, I think we've talked about. And then any other additional resources. So oftentimes our insurance providers have benefits that many employees don't know about. Sometimes there are sort of mental health resources available that are free of charge for a number of visits and consultations. And so I think it's important just to make sure that everybody fully understands the insurance benefits that they have and what they can access during this time. This has been difficult for many. I think we've realized a lot of great things that have come from this work from home experiment, but there's also some longing for a little bit of normalcy and a little bit more balance, you know, in regards to collaborating and being with one another. So it's important to check in and make sure that employees know what's available to them. So reducing density is something that we've discussed as sort of one of the #1 things in returning to the workplace right now. You know, whether your group is or your employees are categorized as sort of essential employees that have to be there. As we saw in your poll, there was actually an interesting statistic here that a good percentage have actually stayed, and I'm imagining it's some of the government contractor groups we have here on the line, but have stayed in the office at 75 to 100%. So you've got that essential personnel. You've had to adapt early on to some of these things. But for other groups, it's understanding sort of who needs to come in and when and phasing that. Are you doing sort of a week on, week off schedule or an every other day schedule? And making sure that your office is set up to keep people socially distanced at least 6 feet apart. This is an example of how we might rethink your existing space to help reduce exposure and sort of, again, a lot of this also goes to making sure people feel comfortable, right, to come back to the office. So this shows an example of an A and B shift. So the A shift being the blue dot and the B shift being the yellow dot, and how even in an open workspace, you don't necessarily have to say, oh my gosh, I have to spend all this money and build all these private offices, or I have to spend all this money and raise our workstation heights, to 7 feet tall. What you can do is really take a look at the configuration and distance people. Since we already have to be at a max capacity, which is generally right now not greater than 50%, we want to make sure that we can, I think, use your money wisely at this point in time and space people out accordingly. And I think that also is a big factor in your communal spaces. So you can see here a lot of the green dots and the red X's. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, we'll just reduce our conference room capacity by 50%. Well, unfortunately, conference rooms are generally more packed, and so you're actually losing a lot more than that in how many people should be max occupancy in those conference rooms. So we're guiding our clients through helping them get signage up, understanding, in this existing 16-person conference room, now we're recommending only 6 people. And you might put little stickers on the table to show where you recommend people sitting, or remove chairs, things of that nature to keep it easier for your employees to really adhere, keep them safe, and help them understand sort of how to use your spaces and rethink the workplace. There's some arrows here to show ideal, oh, go ahead, signage when you're walking around your space, but a lot of people are just using common sense here. If you see somebody, have your mask on and try to give them some space to walk by. So how are we taking this short-term solutions that we just in your return to the workplace, and how are we going to transform that into the next workplace, or workplace 2.0? So this is what we're getting asked a lot more right now, and as we're helping our clients through sort of a new workplace strategy, we're taking a lot of what we've learned from working from home the past 6-7 months at this point, and applying that to the future and gathering data and understanding sort of where the leadership team and employees are, what they're craving in the future. So there's a number of things we need to think about, and obviously talent and attracting and retaining your employees. I think an interesting thing that has come out of this is that we are seeing some of our clients being able to really look for employees, not necessarily in the DMV region, because they've realized that certain positions are fine to be remote. They're now able to secure talent in other areas of the country. So I think that's been an interesting thing, but retaining your employees too, making sure people feel engaged in a more virtual environment, and then how are we going to rebalance going back into the workplace and probably still having some balance of remote work and people within your office space. And that goes to culture. You want to keep your culture. Culture is hugely important for people at your current office environment, and for people looking for jobs, they want to know that they're going into a great office culture. So the virtual world has made it a little bit difficult. There are a lot of apps that sort of help with virtual engagement. But I think it's important to make sure when people do start going back to the office, that some that are remote and some that are in the office still feel very connected to one another. So intertechnology playing a big role into that, as well as making sure that our capability to talk like this is very seamless in the office space as well as at home. And so I think we're going to see a large continued focus on making sure that the technology is really on par and future-proof, if you will, so that you can continue to adapt as the technology changes. And then wellness. So obviously this is at the forefront right now. I don't know if anyone here has heard of LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. That has been for many years now, probably 10 years plus, at the forefront of designing office spaces and office buildings. But now we're seeing wellness at the forefront, because people want to feel comfort that their employers are taking into account their wellness, which on the back end of that is really helping the employer, because it's enhancing the employees' health and wellness and productivity. So what we're seeing is a focus on indoor air quality, which is huge right now. I know Michael mentioned a lot of the HVAC measures buildings are taking. We're going to see, I think, an enhanced focus on that within the employee space too. So making sure we have appropriate filters, and making sure, there might be some sort of ionization or UV light introduced, right, to help really purify the air, and then increasing the amount of outside air that people are getting into the space. I think, introducing plants, making sure there's a lot of plants in the environment, fitness, there's just a whole focus on employee wellness that across the board is better for everybody. And then how are we going to be using space? So this is what's really interesting, and it is going to vary across sector and across industry group, but largely we do think that there is going to be more flexibility, as we saw in our poll as well. 70% of you all thought that you would continue a more flexible work from home policy. So as we see a more flexible work from home policy, I think that we are going to see sort of this dynamic workplace where you see an image of in the top right here from the Wall Street Journal article, where people are going to have choice and variety of spaces within the office to work. So I think we're going to still have the need for some dedicated seating, again, largely dependent on the industry group that you're in. But I do think that there is going to be an increase in having almost the office space become a work from anywhere environment too, where you can choose where and how throughout your day you can spend time to focus on whatever effort it is that you need to in different environments. So if you're collaborating, you can be in a collaborative environment, but when you need heads down space to research, to read, to write, whatever it is that you're doing, there are plenty of little micro offices or places people can go to have that focus time. So I think we're going to see space become flexible and really collaborative. That's what we're seeing people miss, collaboration and mentorship with one another, and maybe a little bit less defined by four walls or a workstation. And again, this kind of goes to the freedom of movement, empowerment of your employees, and increasing your culture from anywhere. So that technology plays big into this, but you can work from home. You can, as we've seen, like a lot of people are working from, if they take a vacation from the beach or from a lake or, wherever it is that they are, and not necessarily having to be the home anymore. And then your office space. So really it is becoming a true work from anywhere environment. And I do think that that will play, as I just mentioned, in the office space as well. So how do we have purposeful collaboration in person and digitally, and being intentional about that, so that we're making sure that people aren't feeling left behind if they're at home or somewhere else and others are in the office. And then maximizing your real estate investment. So we need to think about the design of your space. A lot of people right now are looking at shedding space if that works for them. So maybe we are putting in a little bit more elbow room for people. We're not as dense, but we don't need to be technically as dense with the number of people coming in. We're seeing a lot less focus on one seat per employee and more of a shift to, since a lot of groups are thinking of a more robust work from home policy, a percentage of folks that don't necessarily need dedicated or assigned seats and can sort of work from anywhere in that office as a resource environment. So again, optimizing your portfolio if you have multiple locations, and the sizing of your space, and then just taking a look at the value of the savings in your real estate and also your expenses, right? If you are having to plan for remote work employees and a stipend essentially for employees to set up a nice home office, right? We have to think of that too and how that factors in with saving your real estate costs and space. And this is just an example to show, you know, how applying some of these techniques and strategies can result in a space reduction achieved in a more dynamic workplace. So this is a 12,000 square foot existing on the left space where you can see everyone had an assigned office space. So everything in yellow is assigned. And then on the right, showing about a 35% space reduction with the offices in blue being unassigned. So people can come in when they're planning on coming in, they can reserve. So use technology to reserve a space that they would like to work in, whether it's an office or whether they go to a more open collaborative area. And then you'll see too that just the space itself sort of opened up a bit. The one on the left had a lot of hard walls, hard walled conference rooms. And the one on the right, you start to see much more dynamic collaboration spaces throughout. So you really are providing more choice, yet reducing your space and saving some dollars.
So what are the key takeaways? What we've learned since the first quarter of this year. You know, office space is not dead. It'll just look different going forward with many more people working from home. The distancing within offices and the amount of space that tenants require going forward will certainly change. Next, Erica. Okay, thank you. Remote work is here to stay. Regardless of offices opening back up, people will want to retain flexibility remote capabilities provide. Make sure to evaluate current lease documents. Occupiers need to know the existing terms, conditions, and rights of their leases. As Mike pointed out, it's very important to understand your leases with regard to rights to terminate, contraction options, expansion options, and certainly having a good handle on your operating expenses. COVID requires a short-term, long-term approach to include comprehensive return to office plans. Begin assessing strategies as soon as possible. Even though there's a window where we think you'll have plenty of time to maximize and take advantage of the market conditions, the earlier you start, the better. Review operating expenses. Be prepared with the historical data from 2018 and 19 that you can use as a comparison when evaluating 2020 and 2021, which will not look the same, will be quite different. And lastly, the one silver lining to COVID-19 is that it will translate to great opportunities for occupiers of space. Thank you.
And now we'd like to open up the discussion to the audience for any questions you may have. I'll do my best to moderate. And if you could pose any of your questions in the questions box, then we will give you our best answers. I do see one question here, and I'm not quite sure exactly what it corresponds to. So you can unmute your mic if you want to jump in. But someone asked germs, but does it kill COVID-19? I'm not sure if it's one of maybe the different renovations that Christie had mentioned implementing, whether it be UV lights or increased outside air filtration systems. So maybe if you could let us know what you were referring to, we can better answer that question. Okay, let me just make this a little bit. Okay, where do you see commercial property values going? Vacancy for office is hitting historic, hold on, I'm sorry, let me just bring this out so I can make it a little bit bigger. Otherwise I have to My apologies. Okay. Vacancy for office is hitting historic highs, and office properties continue to convert to residential and self-storage if zoned accordingly. Sublease space is taking off. Special servicing of commercial loans at banks are taking off. Retail is in big trouble with vacancy taking off. Do you see property values dropping over the next 24 plus months? Kenny, do you want to take that one?
Well, you know, it's a sort of a catch-22 in a way. We certainly see on a temporary basis, we are seeing a lot more space coming to the market. We're seeing a lot of retailers that cannot maintain their businesses and therefore have to close. We see a number of landlords that find themselves in a position where they have mortgages due on their properties, but they're not getting rent from their tenants. So you would, in theory, you would say that, well, given this current situation and with the amount of vacancy that we should potentially be seeing in the marketplace, how that will be impacting the valuations. There may be a number of properties, unfortunately, that may wind up in foreclosure, but we don't know that for certain at this point. Now, again, we see this as being somewhat temporary, but I would say the answer I would give you is over the next 2 years, I do see certain values coming down. However, when you compare it to the housing market, it's just the opposite. Many people who don't want to live in cities are moving out to more suburban areas right now, and there's a huge demand for housing given the amount of product that's on the market. So that's another area that you may want to look at as well. Great time to refinance.
I just want to, can I add something, Kenny, to that
Yes.
question? Because that question also talked about special servicers and
Yes.
CMBS loans. That's a great part of that question. You know, there's a service that we use, a software that we use called TREP, and we are currently monitoring what they designate as COVID-19 affected loans, and that list happens to be growing. So, you know, that's a very good question. If you are interested in finding out, you know, certainly whether the debt service is being paid, and what the coverage is on a building, you know, that's something that we can help with. I want to be careful to say that just because a building is with a special servicer or being monitored doesn't necessarily mean it's going into foreclosure. So I wouldn't worry right off the bat. But if you're curious as to find out, you know, what's going on in your building as far as the debt, we could certainly assist you with that if you have questions.
Thanks, Mike. So the next question is, basically, are you encouraging office tenants to renegotiate their leases? And I'll take that one. Right now, we're not necessarily suggesting the tenants do anything without first really evaluating their situation. I think the solution for each tenant is really going to be unique to their scenario. If you are a tenant that is confident in the success of your business, and there is an opportunity to reduce your costs by virtue of reducing your rent to be more in line with the market or other components of the economics of the transaction. If you want to implement more liberal work from home policies and therefore could reduce your footprint going forward, and if you are comfortable with extending your lease term, then yes, we do think that this is a prime or optimal opportunity for tenants to leverage the current market conditions to reduce their overall costs. Okay, moving on to the next question. You mentioned UV lighting being implemented. Do you have any information on studies showing UV lighting kills COVID-19, as many UV products say they kill 99.99% of germs, but does it kill COVID-19? Christy, I'll kick it over to you.
Sure. So that's a great question. They are still studying the efficacy on a lot of these really implementations in the mechanical system right now. The interesting thing about UV lighting, for it to be most effective, and this is why a lot of landlords and others are actually looking to the bipolar ionization, but the UV lighting, the air actually has to be slowed down enough for the UV light to have time to kill virus particles and other things. And what is widely recommended more is that we are flushing the systems and bringing in more outside air. So you're not necessarily wanting to, I think, slow down the air as much that the UV light might need for it to be truly effective. So studies are still happening, as you can imagine right now, on the efficacy of exactly the COVID-19 virus particle, but we are seeing more people, I think, interested in the bipolar ionization as possible at the mechanical system, so they don't have to worry about the rate of airspeed.
Thanks, Christy.
Sure.
Our next question starts with a statement. Great presentation. Thank you, Charlie. Are you seeing landlords helping with costs of return to office solutions and/or TI budgets to add dividers, reconfiguring open space? What are we seeing and how are we seeing landlords helping to offset those costs? So,
Mike, do you want to take part of that and I can take part of that, or how do you want to?
Go ahead, Christy.
Okay, so I'll take part of it in which the TI dollars being negotiated. I would say that we are seeing very favorable concession packages in general. I think a lot of that due to the market and also due to the fact that people are understanding that we're wanting to retrofit spaces. The problem is that if you're not in a position to be negotiating a tenant improvement concession package right now, because you're not going through some sort of a restructure or whatever at your space, landlords aren't offering money to tenants per se to retrofit their spaces. So that is largely a tenant expense if you aren't currently in receipt of tenant improvement dollars. We do have a couple of clients that had some flexibility pre-pandemic with tenant improvement dollars over, like, let's call it a 2-year period to be able to use these tenant improvement dollars. So we have been negotiating with landlords on the ability to use them for return to office retrofit strategies in the office space versus just like the physical construction of their new office. So there have been negotiations like that, but it's been when we've already had a concession package to negotiate.
I might want to add to that, Christy, that, I'm sorry. Did you finish? I was just going to say that I have seen in some cases where tenants are requesting some additional funding to do work in their spaces. And quite frankly, unless they're in a position to renegotiate their lease, in many cases that expense may be amortized over the balance of the term, so that the tenants don't have to at least front the upfront costs. But basically, landlords' positions are, and by the way, landlords are very tight on cash right now as well, because in many cases they're not getting their rent, and we're seeing building owners that are reducing their rent as opposed to giving concessions, which is free rent and tenant improvement dollars. They're just lowering their rate down to a really low base rate and expecting the new tenants or the tenancy to pay for improvements. So again, it just depends on the particular situation you're in with the particular landlord that you're working with.
thank you. Now, another question is, what do you think will be the safest measures in utilizing basement type space like a hall? Christy, maybe you can.
Can you repeat that, Erica? Sorry.
So what's the safest measures for utilizing basement space, essentially?
What type of basement space? Like storage space?
Sounds like a below grade office space, if I had to guess.
Sure. So I would say honestly, the same stuff that applies to the other office space, making sure people are socially distanced, that you have enhanced cleaning protocols, that your path of travel to get there, which, assuming that's the elevator space, right? That's a lot of the landlord components of spacing people out there. But I would say that it's not much different from what we're applying to any other office space. I
think air circulation is very important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's as it is sort of anywhere at this point, but making sure that it's designed to the same standards as any other office space, and then if needed, getting those portable HEPA air filters that you can have for enhanced circulation and purification in the office space.
Next question is, given that most leases don't have a pandemic out clause, how realistic is it to reduce your footprint? I think that also goes back to, it depends on your particular situation. Right now, we're leveraging lease clauses. Now, these can be options or rights, whether you have an upcoming, and when I say upcoming, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, a right to terminate or a right to contract, or a lease expiration, which for many of our clients, they may have as much as 5 years remaining on their lease, but there is an opportunity to restructure their lease. Ultimately, landlords are looking to mitigate their risk in the future, and they too are faced with the same level of uncertainty of where the office market will go. And if you're willing to trade off term, thus extending your lease term, we have been very successful in renegotiating leases well in advance of their respective expirations for reduced costs to include reduced footprints. The next,
Let me add a little bit to that, Erica. I have actually seen a recent lease, and this is still in the negotiation stage, where the tenant asked for, in the event of a pandemic in the future, that they can receive some free rent, that they could have their rent abated. The actual paragraph says that they could have it abated, but it's stated for only a certain period of time. It was like 120 days. So, and there are other particulars. They're talking about, you know, if it's a government enacted clause where you're not allowed to go back to the space. There's a lot of new complications, let's say, being added to these clauses, and we're seeing new ones, frankly, every day.
and that's a great point, Mike. I think as it's becoming more of a tenant favorable market, this is the time where we've been very successful in incorporating new terms or new concepts that really many people didn't think of in the past to help protect our clients going forward, to include these pandemic clauses, if you will.
Yeah, because as many, I'm sorry to belabor it. Okay.
I was going to say, this is another topic that needs to be brought up with your business interruption insurance. Your insurers need to be made aware of these situations. And this is an area that you should definitely have some discussions with them with regard to future problems with the pandemic or any other, I guess, disease that may surface. But you know, a lot of people have business interruption, and when they went to the insurance companies, they were saying under the circumstances that business interruption did not apply.
I also wanted to add, I thought I heard in that question how likely it was to be able to downsize if your lease isn't up right now. And we have seen a lot of success even pre-pandemic, because it's been a softer market and a tenant favorable market for some time now, and obviously going more in that direction now. But of restructures of, you know, your current lease after going through sort of your strategic planning exercise, but you know, 3 to 5 years in advance of a lease expiration. So it's not, you know, if your lease doesn't expire until 2024, it's not unlikely once you develop your strategy, you know, over the next 6 months or what have you, that an early restructure where you could downsize and right size for that matter isn't off the table.
So this next question is with regard to someone's specific situation in that their lease ends in January of 2021. They're not using their office space since they're working remotely, as are their employees. There was a COVID case on their floor, and their floor was shut down, cleaned, and opened back up. To that extent, they are not comfortable going back to their offices and want to end their lease. How do I go about doing that? I was told I cannot break my lease to go virtual, but I have to do a smaller office, a co-working desk, and I'm not comfortable and cannot afford the lease going forward. So essentially, what are this person's options?
Well, unfortunately, there are not a number of options available to you. The only things you can do is, number one, you can try to sublease the space for the remaining term at a discount if you get somebody to consider moving in there. Or the other option is to try to negotiate a termination or a buyout with the landlord. Other than those two options, there really are not too many other opportunities that you're going to have.
I agree. The next question is, with regard to a new lease, what are you recommending to add in the force majeure clause to better protect the tenant?
That's a great question, because initially when this whole thing happened, everybody ran to the force majeure clause and said, okay, this is going to be my solution. Well, unfortunately, if you read your force majeure clause, it's not going to specifically mention pandemic, And in most cases, you know, it's usually an act of God. It's a strike. You know, so you know, there are those particulars that don't necessarily apply to this pandemic. And at the end of most of force majeure paragraphs, it states that regardless of what's said above, rent obligations still need to be paid. So, you know, so everybody ran to that, and it wound up that that was not the solution. But that's not to say that that can't be the solution going forward. I think that's where we're seeing groups start to add more language to that paragraph. But it's going to be, as Erica mentioned, it's going to be a negotiation. Sometimes it's going to depend on, you know, the size of the tenant that's asking for this change, the timing of when it's going to be done. But I think that my broker panelists will agree that, you know, you should definitely try, you know, and definitely try to do that. Yep.
And we're seeing that being added both to the force majeure language, so that it covers pandemic and does allow you to abate rent or financial obligations. And then we're also seeing the interruption of services language being renegotiated so it's more tenant favorable. Now, during this pandemic, landlords have been smart to not interrupt services. And therefore, for most people, you can't point to that language to say services were interrupted. They weren't interrupted. The government just mandated that you work from home. And what we're seeing going forward is that we're changing that language to read that if you're unable to use your space in any capacity for any reason, and again, the strength of that language is somewhat contingent on your particular scenario as a tenant and your strength as a tenant, but it gives you the right to abate your rent in the event that maybe not just an interruption of services, but an interruption of office space use. So we do have some time for more questions, but we're currently at the end of our list. So if there's any burning questions out there, we're ready to hear from you. And if not, we then just want to leave you with our names again and remind you that we're here, and we would urge you to contact us at any time. We're advisors first and foremost, and are tenant advocates, and really just want to make sure that landlords are doing right by the occupiers of space. And if there's any way that we can help, we certainly want you to lean on us and utilize us as a resource to your organization.
Well,
And we'd like to thank, we'd like to thank everybody for attending today. We hope that this was beneficial and you've got some good information from this webinar.
well, what a great discussion today. And please join me in thanking our panelists, Kenneth King, Erica King, Christie Minch, and Michael Hetchkop. What a great job. And really what great strategies for business owners and managers to figure out how to best manage this period so that they can bring their employees back and their customers into their space, how to keep their space, how to communicate with their landlords, and to be understanding what the landlord's up against as well as what they're up against. So I think this has been a great presentation and discussion. So round of applause, virtual applause for you. Thank you very much for joining us. And before we say goodbye today, I just wanted to remind everybody who signed on and joined us today, first of all, thank you for spending your morning with us, and mark your calendars. Up next Tuesday, September 22nd at 11 a.m., we're hosting a presentation by MCCC board member, the law firm of Lurch, Early & Brewer, on employer liability during COVID-19. Really important discussion. And in fact, I think many of you have signed up for that. But if you haven't, please reach out to us. It's on our website, but you can give us a call and we will take care of you. And also, by the way, brand new news, and even Kenny and Erica and the team here don't know this, but we are going to be broadcasting the Chamber's Public Safety Awards a week from today, next Thursday, September 24th at 4 o'clock. It'll be on our YouTube channel. We'll be blasting this out to all of our members. We're really excited about that. So, and many, certainly our panel and many of you on the call today have been big supporters, but that's hot off the presses. We made a movie, and so we're going to be celebrating that. So thank you again to the fantastic Cresa team. You did a great job today, and thank you all for joining us. See you next week.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.